You can show up every Monday, push through the pain, and perform thousands of bench press repetitions, yet still see no change in the mirror. Walk into any gym on International Chest Day. Benches are packed and dumbbells are flying as everyone grinds out rep after rep. This creates a cycle where you equate exhaustion with progress. You leave the gym tired and assume you forced your body to grow. These are different physiological states. Sweating and joint stress are symptoms of fatigue. Adaptation and muscle fiber recruitment are requirements for growth. The common advice for a stagnant chest is to add more weight or increase volume, but the chest doesn't understand kilograms or pounds. It only responds to mechanical tension. Without directing that tension properly, the effort you put into the bar becomes wasted energy. The human body prioritizes survival through absolute efficiency. Building muscle is metabolically expensive, so the body seeks the easiest path to move a heavy object from point A to point B. This creates two distinct approaches, moving a weight versus training a muscle. When the goal is simply to move the weight, the human body uses momentum and recruits secondary muscles to share the load. Tension bleeds away from the chest, into the front deltoids, into the triceps, and the rotator cuff. Your evolutionary instinct to make lifting easier is the primary obstacle to hypertrophy. Building the chest requires you to actively resist your own biomechanical shortcuts. Comparing two different ways of performing a heavy bench press reveals the hidden internal reality of the exercise. On the left, shoulder compensation initiates movement. Deltoids and triceps take the load, leaving the chest inactive. On the right, proper alignment isolates the chest fibers. During the eccentric lowering phase, the fibers are under the greatest mechanical stress. Allowing gravity to pull the weight down removes that stress. A controlled descent forces the chest to manage the weight. At the top of the movement, locking the elbows shifts the load onto the joints, providing the chest with an unintended rest period. Adhering to these biomechanical phases ensures the bench press functions as a targeted tension delivery system. Two lifters using the same equipment and program will see different results based entirely on how they direct the force of the weight. Reducing the weight on the bar to ensure strict execution often leads to faster and denser chest development. The pectoralis major is highly responsive to stimulus. Many lifters who struggle with growth find that their chest adapts quickly once the mechanical tension is actually reaching the fibers. This responsiveness means that a lack of progress is often a failure to deliver the correct mechanical message to the muscle. One common setup mistake often prevents that message from being delivered before you even unrack the bar. This error shifts the shoulders into a dominant position, preventing the chest from engaging. Growth occurs when the focus moves from simply clearing a weight to controlling the direction of the tension. You rack the weight, you sit up from the bench, and your front shoulders are burning with intense fatigue, but your chest feels untouched. Millions of lifters attribute this lack of progress to genetics, but the bottleneck usually lies in the specific physics of the movement. The pectoral muscles serve a specific biological function. They are designed to pull the arms toward the center of the body. But something strange happens in the gym. People become obsessed with moving the weight. When that happens, the nervous system subconsciously recruits any nearby muscles that can help complete the repetition. Watch this anatomy of a pressing torso. The first muscle to volunteer is the anterior deltoid, a silent thief draining tension from the pectorals. Over time, the results are obvious. The shoulder mass expands while the chest remains completely unchanged. Failing to control this mechanical takeover ensures the target muscle never receives the workload required to trigger hypertrophy. This muscular takeover begins before you unrack the bar. It starts with the setup. Lying entirely flat on the bench is a common error. It leaves the upper body with no tension, no rigid structure, and no stability. If a building has a weak foundation, the structure above becomes unstable. Your shoulder blades are the foundation of your press. Without a stable base, the rest of the movement degrades. Without a fixed shoulder blade position, the chest cannot produce maximum force. This lack of leverage causes the nervous system to immediately shift the load onto the shoulders. By pulling the shoulder blades back, as if squeezing a pencil between them, the scapulae lock together, pushing the chest upward. Vector arrows show force lines shifting off the shoulders and redirecting purely into the newly elevated pectoral fibers. Stabilizing the scapula forces the brain out of its familiar movement patterns and physically establishes the chest as the primary target. Many lifters believe bigger movements automatically mean better movements. This side profile animation highlights the danger of overstretching. When the shoulder joint dips too low, the rotator cuff becomes overextended. Joint stability is lost, and the risk of injury increases significantly. The opposite extreme, performing tiny half or quarter reps, robs the chest of experiencing any meaningful stretch under load. True hypertrophy occurs when high levels of mechanical tension are maintained through a controlled optimal range of motion. Chasing extreme depth or performing ego-driven partial reps both leak tension away from the chest. Range of motion is a tool for precision, not a test of flexibility. Next, we must look at a load-bearing component that is often ignored, the forearms. Attempting to support a heavy structure with crooked pillars is inefficient. The weight cannot transfer cleanly and instead creates pressure at the joints. When forearms tilt inward, kinetic force escapes, putting unnecessary stress on wrists and shoulders. But as the forearms click into vertical alignment, the force bleed disappears, driving pressure straight down into glowing pectoral fibers. True strength is not just about raw force, but about dictating the exact direction that force travels. These tiny corrections to force trajectory are the details that determine whether a muscle grows or remains the same after months of training. These mechanical errors are often driven by a single psychological trap, the obsession with progressively heavier loads. The muscle fiber has no concept of the numbers stamped on a dumbbell. It only registers mechanical tension. A controlled repetition with moderate weight will stimulate more muscle fibers than a sloppy, dangerously heavy ego lift. Notice the quality of the contraction. There is a difference between moving an object from point A to point B and forcing muscles to contract. The pectoral muscles respond to precision, control, and quality, not raw, misdirected intensity. Until you trade ego for biomechanical precision, chest development will likely remain stalled regardless of the weight you add to the bar. But there is a second major mistake hidden in almost every chest workout in the gym. This error lies in the specific angle of the upper arms. It's a geometrical flaw, quietly shifting tension away from the chest on every repetition. Correcting this specific arm position will change the way you perform every press from this day forward. You spend months on the bench, pushing heavier loads and increasing your volume, but your chest remains unchanged while your shoulders begin to ache. The common error is assuming that because a weight moves from your chest to a lockout, the target muscle is the primary driver of that movement. The body is indifferent to effort or ego. It is a system that responds strictly to the laws of mechanical leverage. The distinction between an average lifter and an advanced bodybuilder is rarely found in genetics, but in a series of subtle, often invisible mechanical adjustments. Without distinguishing between the act of moving weight and the art of stimulating tissue, the mechanical signal to the chest remains too diluted to trigger a significant response. One of the most critical variables in muscle recruitment is the specific angle of your elbows relative to your torso. This top-down view shows the flared elbow position. Arms extending out at 90 degrees force vulnerable front deltoids to absorb the load. Conversely, tucking elbows tightly shifts work entirely to the triceps. The optimal midpoint, 45 degrees, places pectoral fibers in the direct line of force. This specific geometry balances joint longevity with maximum force production, allowing the weight to be managed by the muscle rather than the connective tissue. Mastering this single angle transforms the press from a shoulder-dominant movement into a precise tool for pectoral development. Beyond the angle of the arms, we have to look at the movement pathway itself and reconsider what it means to actually press a weight. The primary function of the chest isn't just pushing forward, it is adduction, bringing the upper arms toward the midline. While a standard press moves straight, the chest functions most efficiently when the arms are pulled inward along a natural arc. This is why many advanced lifters stop thinking about pushing the weight up. Instead, they visualize hugging a massive tree or crushing an object between their biceps. Shifting your focus from a push to a squeeze changes the nature of the contraction, forcing the chest to maintain tension throughout the entire range of motion. Replacing the goal of moving a weight vertically with the goal of bringing the arms together is what finally allows for true pectoral isolation. This isolation is a neurological process. Hypertrophy begins as an electrical signal in the brain before any physical contraction occurs. Observe the difference in execution between a beginner and a master. Every centimeter of this descent is deliberate, controlled, and under constant tension. Using momentum or bouncing the weight at the bottom allows gravity to take over, effectively turning off the target muscle for the most productive part of the lift. Slow, intentional control maximizes the neurological signal sent to the chest fibers, ensuring they remain the primary driver of the resistance. Muscle tissue cannot read the numbers on a dumbbell. It only recognizes the duration and magnitude of the mechanical tension placed upon it. Prioritizing the quality of the signal over the weight of the load is the clear line that separates productive training from simple ego lifting. This leads to the central paradox of hypertrophy. A muscle does not grow while you are in the gym. The training session is a catabolic event. You are intentionally creating microscopic trauma and tearing the muscle fibers apart. The actual adaptation, the rebuilding of those fibers into a larger and stronger structure, takes place exclusively during the recovery phase in the following days. When training is met with inadequate sleep or poor nutrition, the body is unable to complete the repairs, effectively dismantling the work you just performed. The consistent application of these variables, the 45-degree angle, with intentional adduction, and disciplined recovery, creates a compounding effect over weeks and months. When correct mechanical execution finally meets the body's recovery requirements, the biological instructions for growth are clear, and the chest becomes.
Thousands of lifters walk into the gym every day, exhaust themselves pushing heavy iron, and leave wondering why their chest refuses to grow. The instinct is usually to solve the problem by adding more weight. It is an addiction that often goes entirely unnoticed. Instead of building muscle tissue, the goal becomes chasing numbers: 5 more kilograms, 10 more pounds, or a new personal record. This shift happens the moment someone steps up to an adjacent bench, pressing a heavier load. The mission of developing the chest vanishes. In its place, a new goal takes over: moving a heavy object from point A to point B. These goals involve different priorities. Moving an object relies on leverage and momentum to get the weight up. Stimulating a muscle relies on directing tension into specific biological tissue. The human body does not reward a lifter's ego. When the priority is moving maximum weight, the body finds the most efficient path of least resistance to accomplish the task, which frequently bypasses the very muscles you are trying to grow. Consider 2 different athletes. Athlete number 1 grabs the heaviest dumbbells available. His repetitions are rushed, the weights bounce at the bottom of the movement, and his lifting mechanics are highly erratic. Athlete number 2 selects a moderate weight. His movement is deliberate. He lowers the dumbbells slowly, pauses at the bottom of the stretch, and squeezes at the top with control. Muscle physiology dictates a hard truth. Your chest has no eyes. It cannot read the number printed on the side of a dumbbell, and it cannot perceive the total load on a machine. Your chest only feels mechanical tension. If that tension is lost through momentum or poor form, the numerical weight you are holding becomes biologically irrelevant. When we analyze the pushing phase of a heavy, uncontrolled lift, the failure begins at the very start of the repetition. The initial push is often an explosive heave just to get the mass moving. Generating that initial surge builds momentum. Once a heavy object is in motion, physics carries the load upward, requiring less continuous effort from the target muscle to complete the movement. Anatomically, momentum allows the weight to bypass the chest. The force is transferred away from the pectoral fibers and shifted into the shoulder joints and triceps. As momentum takes over, the chest effectively stops working. A momentum-assisted repetition creates an illusion of strength. It satisfies the ego, but it ruins the actual muscle-building stimulus of the workout. Without the chest absorbing the load, the shoulders and elbows are forced to absorb the shock of an uncontrolled mass moving rapidly through space. Momentum acts as a parasite. It makes the repetition feel easier while secretly stealing the stimulus required for growth. Muscle fibers require mechanical stress over a specific duration to grow. A fast, uncontrolled movement rarely provides that necessary window of time. This chart compares time under tension, measuring the mechanical stress of a rushed 1-second repetition against a controlled 5-second repetition. During the eccentric or lowering phase, many lifters drop the weight quickly. Gravity takes over and the mechanical stress on the muscle plummets. The controlled athlete uses the lowering phase as an active part of the exercise. By fighting gravity, they maintain a high plateau of stress, filling the chart with accumulated tension. Rushing the eccentric phase is merely surviving the weight. Controlling the descent is where advanced lifters force the muscle to adapt. Some dismiss the mind-muscle connection as a myth, but it is an observable neurological function. Every physical repetition begins with an electrical signal originating in the brain's motor cortex, traveling down the nervous system to the muscle fibers. A stronger, more focused neurological signal recruits and activates a higher percentage of muscle fibers during the lift. An experienced bodybuilder can command the chest to contract with intensity, whereas a beginner often struggles to feel any internal awareness at all. Chest isolation is a practice skill of directing targeted electrical tension. It is the ability to command specific fibers to contract, rather than simply letting the joints move through a range of motion. During your next workout, drop the total weight by 20%. Focus entirely on the quality of the contraction and the control of the movement. You will find that working with intense isolation is often more difficult than simply moving heavy weights with momentum. Modern culture demands 30-day transformations, but the biological reality of muscle growth is frustratingly slow. This compounding curve shows the real path to growth. Small improvements in technique, eccentric control, and neural activation stack upon each other over thousands of repetitions. Overnight transformations do not exist. Meaningful chest growth is the gradual mathematical result of compounding precision over years. Developing a massive chest requires shoulder stability, proper elbow tracking, relentless tension, and extreme patience. But even with flawless execution of these mechanics, your effort in the gym can still result in total failure. Lifting weights creates the initial mechanical damage triggering growth. However, the physical weaving of thicker, denser muscle strands happens only during hours of recovery. Mastering the science of tension is only half the battle. Without the final pieces of recovery and nutrition, the most perfect repetition is wasted.
You train to the point of absolute failure. You push heavy weights, you track your sets, and you leave the gym exhausted. Yet, despite the effort, your chest refuses to grow. The error usually traces back to a complete misunderstanding of the process. Your chest does not actually build new tissue during your workout. The workout itself is strictly a signal. It is a specific set of mechanical instructions telling the body that its current level of strength is inadequate, and it needs to adapt. This diagram models the problem using a construction crew. Every day, the workers arrive on site and labor to build a structure. But every night, someone breaks in and steals the raw materials. The building will never be completed. This matches exactly what happens when you relentlessly break down muscle tissue under the bar, but fail to supply the biological resources required for rebuilding. To finally see progress, you must stop judging your routine purely by how much weight you move. You have to master the biomechanical signal in the gym and the biological adaptation that follows it. Let's start with the mechanical instructions you issue on the bench. This split-screen diagram highlights the physical difference between an ego-driven lift and optimal form. On the left, poor mechanics place severe strain directly onto the shoulder joint, leaving the chest inactive. On the right, correct execution creates primary activation in the chest tissue itself. The first step to achieving that optimal activation is locking your shoulders back and down before every set. This establishes a stable foundation, protects the joints, and ensures force transfers accurately through the target muscle. Next, you have to manage your elbow position. If your arms are flared too wide or tucked too close to your torso, you lose leverage. You need a middle ground that provides an efficient, balanced path for the weight to travel. From that position, you execute the lift by deliberately slowing down. Instead of letting gravity drop the weight, you force the muscle to control the descent. Down at the cellular level, that controlled lowering phase creates extreme mechanical tension. The raw muscle fibers are forced to stretch and contract under load, causing the precise microscopic damage required to initiate growth. By organizing your joints and controlling the tempo, you transform a generic physical struggle into a highly specific biological instruction. But the workout is only the trigger. Hours and days later, while you are entirely outside of the gym, the builder phase begins. This relies on the most effective recovery tool available, sleep. It is the biological switch that shifts your body from tissue destruction into tissue repair. This visual models exactly how the process works inside the body. During deep sleep, protein synthesis increases and hormones circulate through the bloodstream. These molecular particles seek out and rebuild the damaged fibers, expanding their overall mass. However, if you cut your sleep short, this entire pipeline slows to a crawl. The particles dissipate, protein synthesis drops, and the damaged tissue remains frayed. To construct new tissue, your body also requires physical materials, specifically protein. Providing that material occasionally will not produce results. It requires monotonous consistency. Day after day, week after week, you have to ensure the body always has the resources to complete construction. Yet, even with perfect nutrition, many lifters sabotage their own adaptation by program hopping. They try a routine for 3 days, find a new one online, and immediately abandon the first. This diagram illustrates the problem perfectly. It is like planting a seed and then digging it up every few days to check if it has grown. Your nervous system requires repetition to learn, stabilize, and eventually adapt to a specific stress. Giving a basic, consistent program enough time to work will always yield greater adaptation than constantly hunting for a complicated new routine. Now, project this process 6 months into the future. This graph charts exactly what happens when a perfect mechanical signal meets relentless biological recovery. You pass through neurological adaptation, establish the habit, and eventually reach the phase of visible tissue growth. The reality is that your genetics are rarely working against you. The human body is simply a machine that responds accurately to the inputs it receives. Look closely at your current habits. Evaluate your form, your sleep, your protein intake, and ask yourself what specific instructions you are currently sending your body. If the results are lacking, change the instructions. Master the basic mechanical movements and execute the biological recovery relentlessly over time. Eventually, the physical results become obvious, but the true outcome is internal. To build the physique, you had to become a highly disciplined, relentlessly patient person.